Dr. Craig, you have 9 minutes for your rebuttal.
You remember I said in my first speech that Dr. Atkins needed to give us some evidence against the existence of God. And I noticed a discernible lack of such evidence in that opening speech. He gave us refutations of my arguments, but he provided no argumentation whatsoever that God does not exist. And he's got to do that if he's going to convince us of atheism. Kai Nielsen, who is an atheist philosopher, recognizes this point. Nielsen says, to show that an argument is invalid or unsound is not to show that the conclusion of the argument is false. All the proofs of God's existence may fail, but it may still be the case that God exists. In short, to show that the proofs do not work is not enough by itself. It may still be the case that God exists. So at best, Dr. Atkins has simply left us with agnosticism tonight. He hasn't given us any good reason in that opening speech to think that God does not exist. Now, he did make a couple of general comments about the nature of explanation. He said that we should prefer simpler explanations to more elaborate ones, and I would agree, all things being equal, that's true. And I would say that theism is a simple explanation in that it provides a unifying view of the world that explains a vast range of data, scientific, historical, ethical, and personal. He says, but it's just intellectual laziness to conclude to the existence of God, to say that God is the reason or the explanation for something. But notice that many of the arguments that I gave tonight were deductive arguments. That is to say, if the premises are true, then the conclusion logically follows. Whether you like it or not, whether you regard it as explanatory or not, is irrelevant. In a deductive argument, as long as the premises are true and the logic is valid, the conclusion is inescapable. And therefore, he's simply got to dispute my premises. It's not enough to simply say that God is not a good explanation. So let's look then specifically at the case that I laid out for the existence of God. First, my argument from the origin of the universe. Notice that he actually agrees with my two premises, that whatever begins to exist has a cause, and secondly, that the universe began to exist. Why then does he conclude that the universe does not have a cause? Well, did you catch how radical his view is? Because he doesn't really believe the universe exists. On Dr. Atkins' view, nothing exists. So it's not that something came out of nothing. He literally believes nothing exists. As he writes in his article, we, like mathematics, are elegant, self-consistent reorganizations of nothing. Now, let me make three responses to this. First of all, it's a total misunderstanding to say that because the negative energy balances out the positive energy, that therefore there is nothing. That's as illogical as saying that because I have a certain amount of debts and I have a certain amount of money, that therefore I have zero money. It's just illogical. Even if on balance it balances out to nothing, there's still negative energy and positive energy. It doesn't mean that nothing exists. Secondly, I would point out that you still need a productive cause for the universe, even if it's the case that you don't need a material cause for the universe. Christopher Isham, who is the leading quantum cosmologist of Great Britain, points out in his article, Cosmos and Creation, there is still a need for ontic seeding to produce the energy, even if on balance it is not. So you still need to have an ontic seed, a beginning, a cause, to bring the positive and negative energy into being, even if on balance it's not. But finally, as I say, his solution, I think, is simply absurd. His solution is that nothing exists. And that's simply absurd. I at least exist. As Descartes said, even when I doubt that I exist, who is there to do the doubting? I doubt, therefore I am. There must be something that exists. So I hope you understand how radical this alternative is. If honestly the alternative to belief in the existence of God is to say that nothing is real, nothing exists, then I say let those who decry the irrationality of belief in God be henceforth forever silent, because nothing could be more irrational or implausible than that. Now, what about my second argument from the complex order in the universe? Here he raised three questions. First, he says, there are problems of probability here. In a lottery, any person's winning is improbable, but somebody has to win. The analogy is a bad one. It's not the improbability of just any universe existing. That's right, any universe is equally improbable. It is the specified improbability of a life-permitting universe existing. The analogy would be a lottery in which there's a billion black balls and one white ball, and you have to reach in and pick out a ball. Now, any single ball you pick is equally improbable, but it is overwhelmingly more probable that whichever ball you pick, it will be black rather than white. In the same way, given the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe, it is vastly more probable that the universe should be life-prohibiting. What is his explanation for the life-permitting universe that exists? Well, he gives two speculations. First, he says, maybe there is only one physically possible universe. It has to be this way. I think that sort of a theory of everything is simply not a credible alternative. P.C.W. Davies says, and I quote, "There is absolutely no evidence in favor of it. Even if the laws of physics were unique, it doesn't follow that the physical universe itself is unique. The laws must be augmented by cosmic initial conditions. It seems then that the physical universe does not have to be the way it is. It could have been otherwise." So we have to have an explanation for why we are balanced on this knife's edge that permits our own existence. Secondly, though, he says you could have many parallel universes. Let me just make 3 points about this. First, this is a metaphysical hypothesis, not a scientific one. And as such, it's no better than a divine designer. In fact, Occam's razor would say that a divine designer is simpler because instead of positing an infinite number of randomly ordered parallel worlds, you posit one single designer, and that is a simpler hypothesis and therefore to be preferred. Secondly, there is no known way for such a collection of parallel universes to be formed. We've already seen that Dr. Atkins' scenario of universes tumbling into being from prior mathematical points is self-contradictory. Third, the mechanisms that have been suggested for forming parallel universes still require fine-tuning in order to get the mechanism generated for making these parallel worlds, so that fine-tuning isn't escaped. Finally, there is no independent evidence for parallel universes, but there is for God, such as the moral argument. So let's turn to that moral argument then. Notice that he admits that without God there are no objective moral values. He writes in one of his works, "Science shows us that there can be no moral distinction between an administered poison and one that the body itself has slowly generated." Do you understand what he's saying? There's no moral distinction between poisoning someone deliberately and that person dying of natural causes. Now, I hope that Dr. Atkins and his wife are happily married, because if she believes that, then if I were he, I'd start eating in restaurants. I think that on a serious note, it's evident that there is a moral distinction between deliberate murder and just dying a natural death. As John Healy, the executive director of Amnesty International, recently wrote in a fundraising letter, he said, "I am writing you today because I think you share my profound belief that there are indeed some moral absolutes. When it comes to torture, to government-sanctioned murder, to disappearances, there are no lesser evils. These are outrages against all of us. So if you agree with me that there are objective moral values, then I think you should also agree that God exists as their foundation." Dr. Atkins did not address the historical evidence from the empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus, and the origin of the disciples' faith for the resurrection of Christ, which provides miraculous evidence of God's existence, nor did he address the immediate experience of God. It seems to me that in the absence of any positive arguments for atheism tonight, I'm rational in believing in God on the basis of my own immediate experience of God. Why should I deny that real experience in my life for no good reason at all? So in the absence of positive arguments for atheism, I think I'm perfectly rational and within my rights to stick with my belief in the existence of God.